The most controversial anime of 2018 is coming back for a second season. That's right, it's Goblin Slayer. We're going to talk about what exactly our thoughts were on the original and what you can expect going into season 2. So, let's get started. The plot of Goblin Slayer is fairly simple. It's about a naive young priestess who wants to become an adventurer. Her and a group of other rookie heroes set out to kill some goblins only to be overwhelmed. All of them are killed except the priestess, who is saved by the titular Goblin Slayer. As his name suggests, he is the man with a vendetta against goblins and has made it his personal life goal to kill any and all goblins. Before we get into any analysis or opinions about the plot or characters, there's an elephant in the room we need to address. It's something unavoidable when it comes to discussing Goblin Slayer, that being the first episode. Now, on this channel, we cover a lot of dark anime like Chainsaw Man, but there's one certain scene in the first episode that, for a lot of people, crossed a line. So, like we said, all of the other members of the priestess's party are killed by goblins. She's saved by the Goblin Slayer, who then goes on to kill the other goblins, including the goblin children. For the most part, the anime doesn't actually show that much gore. The warrior getting stabbed to death by goblins and the Goblin Slayer mercy killing the wizard aren't seen in much detail. Neither is Goblin Slayer killing the goblin children, and honestly, we think this is effective. For as much as we like gory action scenes like in Chainsaw Man or Cyberpunk Edgerunners, sometimes leaving the violence to the audience's imagination works better. We think that it works especially well for when Goblin Slayer kills the young goblins. All you hear is the sound effects and see the priestess's reactions. Whatever you're imagining is probably worse than anything they could have shown. But what they did end up showing explicitly, and what a lot of people had a problem with, is what happened to the fighter. And now, with how YouTube's content system works, we're not sure how much we can show or say here, but let's just say what happens to her is really unpleasant. Another thing people noticed is that a lot of women are put in danger by the goblins just for the sake of making the goblins look more evil. For example, one scene from the manga that got cut featured a team of female adventurers investigating a den of goblins only to all die in a very upsetting and brutal way. We're honestly glad that that one got cut though, because unlike the previous example with the fighters, seeing these adventurers die doesn't even add anything to the story, other than what we already knew about the goblins being evil. Now, we don't think the author hates women or anything. We think the goal is to make the goblins as despicable as possible. That way you don't feel bad when the Goblin Slayer kills them all. After all, his goal is to basically commit goblin genocide, so the goblins need to have absolutely zero redeeming qualities. So yeah, if you're squeamish about this sort of content, don't watch Goblin Slayer and especially don't read it. All these scenes were way worse in the manga. But our problem isn't that the story includes dark content. We've seen way worse stuff in manga like Berserk. No, our problem with the first episode is that the Goblin Slayer is indecisive about its tone for the rest of the series. After the first episode, things seem to kind of slow down, and there's a lot more lighthearted and calm moments, and honestly, it's not bad, but the thing is, if they wanted this sort of tone, they should have set it up from the beginning. It feels like the author didn't know what kind of story they wanted to write, and the two halves of the story feel like they don't go together. For example, the priestess is pretty clearly traumatized by what happened in episode 1, but in the following episode, she seems like she's back to normal. Not that she has to act traumatized all the time, but at least some acknowledgement of how the priestess is feeling. Granted, there are moments when the story gets darker and the goblins feel more like a threat, but that just makes those dark scenes feel more out of place compared to the rest. Look, it may sound like we don't like Goblin Slayer, but there are things to like about it. Let's take a deeper look into the plot and characters. Now, you may have noticed that we haven't mentioned any real character names, and there's a good reason for that. You see, the setting of Goblin Slayer is intentionally modeled after the classic fantasy like Dungeons and Dragons. All of the characters don't have names. They're simply just called stuff like Goblin Slayer or Priestess. Basically, Goblin Slayer is a story built of broad archetypes of the fantasy genre. You could call it lazy, but we think it's an interesting choice. Plus, it gives your characters archetypes that represent the sort of thing that makes them more identifiable. There's actually a fan theory of what the world of Goblin Slayer is actually just one big game of D&D. This actually does make a lot of sense, not only because the whole nobody having names thing either. There are many references to the gods in this world playing with dice. Gods in this case would mean the players of the game who dictate every character's action. Another thing about Goblin Slayer is that the core concept of the show is actually very unique and interesting. Something pointed out by many characters in the show is that the Goblin Slayer obsession with goblins is kinda weird. In most heroic fantasy stories, our heroes would be off to slay dragons or demons. Goblins are usually just a minor annoyance. So in a typical fantasy setting, the idea of someone dedicating their lives to only killing goblins is a strange idea. Despite how dangerous the goblin goblins are shown to be, the Goblin Slayer's obsession with them borders on unhealthy a lot of the time. We think the central idea behind Goblin Slayer is definitely a fun one. He's shown to be a genuinely skilled guy, but he puts all of his talent towards something most would consider beneath him. Not only that, but he has really poor social skills too. Goblin Slayer has a very terse style of speech, never really saying all that much. When he talks, it's just to convey the bare minimum of what he's trying to say. The Priestess is our second main character after Goblin Slayer, and she sort of acts as a foil to him. She's much more emotionally open and kind than he is, maybe even a little naive. She, of course, was the only one to survive the massacre in episode 1 thanks to Goblin Slayer helping her. Really, most of the main cast exists to contrast against Goblin Slayer in some way. On some level, the story isn't just about killing goblins. It's about Goblin Slayer learning what it's like to be a normal person again after spending so long obsessing over goblins. Now, for the upcoming second season, what exactly are our hopes for it? Well, we do hope it improves upon the points we already liked. We enjoy Goblin Slayer as a protagonist, both as a cool guy and killing things as an antisocial weirdo trying to make friends. We also hope it does something about the main criticism we had, that being the conflicting tone. Either really lean into the darker elements of the series or try and pull it back a little bit and try to go less extreme with the dark content from season 1. Either way, we think having a more decisive tone would improve the show. Seriously, comparing the first and second episodes is a huge case of tonal whiplash. So overall, Goblin Slayer is a show we kind of have mixed feelings about. On one hand, it's not as bad as some people say. It has a lot of positive elements to it, and if you've got a stomach for darker content, you should give it a chance. But that being said, don't expect it to be dark the whole way through either. That one big problem of indecisive tone is really what keeps Goblin Slayer from being truly great. But we're hoping that with the second season coming soon that it can improve on the parts of the anime we liked. No matter what happens though, we'll definitely be giving season 2 a watch. After all, even if we were a lot more critical than usual in this video, we still think that Goblin Slayer deserves a fair shot with this upcoming second season. Be sure to let us know your thoughts on Goblin Slayer and let us know just what your expectations and hopes for season 2 are.